What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. If you guys want to support the channel, you can catch me on Whatnot. I will be streaming this Friday. I'm going to give away some packs. If you use the link in the description down below, you'll get $15, and again, you'll be supporting me whenever you do that. Another way is becoming a patron. Not only will you get to vote weekly on a weekly voted patron Deck Tech, additionally, it's the best way to support the channel. Special shout out to my high contributing patrons, Newsom, you rock. Now let's get into today's deck tech with Obeka, and at first look I was like, alright, Phyrexian Arena, let's draw a ton of cards, but then after looking at it more, she completely breaks the courts. Now what I mean by that is there is a whole cycle, I think there's actually 2 cycles of courts, and they give you a little bit of a benefit on your upkeep, and if you untap and you're the Monarch, you get a huge benefit that's really swingy. The only thing is your opponents are not going to let you untap with the Monarch. You have 3 players trying to prevent that from happening. Obeka completely solves that problem because we can take the Monarch back by dealing combat damage to our opponents, right? And then we get the additional upkeep triggers from Obeka, triggering our courts no matter if we untap as the Monarch or not. Now, this means that we have to make our commander really hard to block, but we're trying to do that anyway, and she already has Menace, and then we have to deal damage to our opponents. Again, we're already trying to do that. So we're going to suit Obeka up with a bunch of very evasive equipment. We're going to play these broken court cards. We're going to copy these broken court cards, and then we're going to see how many of these broken triggers we can get. If that sounds like a deck tech you want to get into, let's get into it. Let's kick it off by talking about those upkeep triggers. We have Court of Embereth. Now this one's solid. It's going to generate us a board state and really start draining our opponents. Remember, the more damage we deal, the more knights we get, the more damage our opponents are going to take. This is one of those courts that can end the game fairly quickly. Court of Ire is going to keep any creature we want off the battlefield. This is going to make it extremely hard for our opponents to stick any creature that's meaningful. Additionally, it's going to make our commander super hard to block because there's no creatures on the battlefield. Court of Ambition is one of those cards that can end the game fairly quickly. I mean, let's assume we're not the Monarch whenever we untap. We deal 3 damage, and then assuming Obeka is still only a 2/5, we deal 2 damage, become the Monarch, and that's going to deal a total of 12. So that's 15 damage to every opponent on our turn. Court of Locthwain is honestly super solid. We're going to exile a card on upkeep, and then as long as we become the Monarch, we can even cast the card we exile on upkeep for free. So on the very low end, we're exiling 3 cards from our opponent's library, and we get to cast all of those for free. Additionally, all we have to do is target the Timmy player, and we could be getting some massive dinosaurs off that. Court of Vantress is kind of the other strategy of the deck. We want to create token copies of all of these other broken courts, right? So Courts of Vantress is a solid way to do that. It's going to net us up to 2 extra copy of those broken enchantments every turn, and even if we don't have a way to connect with our commander, it can still turn into a copy of something useful for us. Maybe a soul ring, maybe another enchantment. Like I said, this one's very flexible. Skyline Despot, how about instead of getting some massive value and dealing damage to our opponents, we just start making some 5/5 dragons. Dragon Master Outcast does the exact same thing. We do have to make sure there's 6 lands in play though, so that's kind of a bummer, but like I said, this card's still going to be super solid. Extravagant Replication. This is going to be another way we can create a token copy of a non-land permanent. So anything that has an upkeep trigger that we're trying to copy, Extravagant Replication can do. Endless Evil is a little more niche, a little more targeted because it has to be a creature. That creature can't be legendary, but we still have a ton of targets in this deck, and again, we do have some ways to take our opponent's creatures in this deck as well. Tomb of Horrors Adventurer. Now, this is going to give us the initiative. The initiative is another upkeep trigger, so we can really go through this dungeon at insane rates. And then once we do complete the dungeon, our second spell each turn is going to get copied. Notably, that will work for any permanent or instant or sorceries, so the value here is going to be pretty insane. You do have to make sure you complete a dungeon first, but again, this deck can complete dungeons extremely quick. Plarg and Nasari are honestly insane cards. I've seen this card win games. Now, you're essentially going to get an Atali trigger at the beginning of your upkeep, but one of your opponents does get an option to say, hey, you can't cast that spell, but the other 3 are free to cast, and then you get to choose 2 of those spells to cast. So it's an Atali trigger where your opponent says, hey, not this one, and then you get to choose 2 for free. That's going to be insane and really catapult you ahead of your opponents. If this card can resolve with your commander on the battlefield, you will win the game very soon. Bonehorde Strachosaur is going to be amazing in this deck. You're going to get treasure tokens, you're going to get card advantage, and you're going to get a board state. This card just kind of does everything. If we can start creating token copies of this, yeah, our opponents are going to be in trouble because he is a 5/5 body all on his own. Generous Plunderer is going to be a pretty solid political piece, right? We can say, hey, let me hit you, you can have the treasures, I'm going to get the treasures, and if they say no, you will probably just have to hit somebody else and just give the treasures to the weakest player. It's going to allow them to catch up anyway, and it's going to catapult you ahead of everybody else. Virtue of Persistence is incredibly flexible. Not only is this a kind of removal spell, additionally, if we can land that, we're going to start reanimating all of our creatures. Not to mention, this does say a graveyard, so we can reanimate our opponent's creatures as well. Tithing Blade seemed super solid here. It's a one-sided edict effect, and then we can easily flip this in the late game to start draining our opponents. Creeping Bloodsucker is a little bit better though, because this is actually a drain effect. So assuming we get our upkeep and then 2 additional upkeeps from Obeka, we're going to be draining our opponents by 3 and gaining 9 life a turn. Twilight Prophet's super solid here. It's going to draw us a ton of cards, and it's going to start draining our opponents and gaining us life at the same time. We are also running Phyrexian Arena. Again, just the card advantage here is going to be amazing. Bitter Blossom is also going to see play in this deck. It is a Monarch deck, so if we can protect the Monarch and untap with it, that's just going to help us out. I know that's not exactly the goal because Obeka kind of just breaks that strategy wide open, but hey, if we can prevent our opponents from attacking us for a turn, that's just going to help us out in the long run. This is also why I included the cards like Creeping Bloodsucker. That way, whenever we're losing life due to these upkeep triggers, we are also gaining some life to kind of mitigate that. Struggle for Project Purity seemed super solid here. Honestly, I'm going to start playing this card in general because it basically draws you 3 cards on your upkeep, which is kind of insane. Now, it says at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent draws a card. You draw a card for each card drawn this way. Assuming you have 3 opponents, you're drawing 3 cards, they're drawing 3 cards. So you're going to have a ton of ammunition, and hopefully the card advantage we get is just going to outpace our opponents. Laughing Jesper Flint seemed amazing in this deck. Now, Obeka is an outlaw, and so is Laughing Jesper Flint. So all we have to do is start exiling cards from our opponent's deck, play those cards, get card advantage, and those creatures that we cast off of our opponents are also going to be outlaws. This can very quickly accumulate a ton of value off of our opponent's library. I'm also going to include Call of the Ring because actually the ring temp strategy is going to be very good for us here. Let me remind you guys what the ring does first of all. The first tempt effect is going to give our commander Skulk. This means that creatures with power greater than 2 can't even block her. So this is just going to add to her evasion. The next time whenever the ring bearer attacks, we get to draw and discard a card. So now we're getting a loot effect. Whenever your ring bearer becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller sacrifices it at the end of combat. So now they can't block Obeka with any creature that they care about. Additionally, she does have Menace. So this means they're going to have to sacrifice 2 creatures at the end of combat if they want to start blocking Obeka. Additionally, the last one is going to start making our opponents lose 3 life every time she deals combat damage. Notably, we only care about the first 3, but the first 3 happen incredibly fast. All we have to do is play Call of the Ring and then deal combat damage with Obeka, and we have everything we care about. Midnight Clock is actually going to be useful here. We really don't care about our graveyard in this deck, so we're going to happily shuffle that back in and get a fresh new grip. Survok's Tome, this is just another way to get the initiative and its ramp at the same time. I just wanted to include some of the best initiative cards I could, because honestly the initiative is pretty solid here. Replicating Ring, I'm really excited about this card. It's going to sit on the battlefield, get those night counters, and then out of nowhere ramp us into oblivion. Ring of Valkis is absolutely insane. Let's go through just 2 combat steps. The first combat step, we go ahead and attack. We're going to get 2 upkeep triggers, so we'll put 2 counters on Obeka. Then we go to our next turn, upkeep, we put a counter on Obeka. Now she has 5 power. We deal combat damage, we get 5 upkeeps, boom, Obeka has 10 counters out of nowhere. And then on top of that, we do get haste, which is not useless. Exalted Flamer seemed solid. We don't run a ton of instant and sorceries, but the fact that we can just get all of our removal back, all of our counter spells back, and all we have to do is keep attacking, which is what we want to do anyway, seemed too broken not to include this. Xanathar Guild Kingpin. Now, this one might be a head scratcher at first, and honestly, I'm just trying to test it out. But the fact that we can deal combat damage and then choose every opponent, right? Because on our upkeep, we'll choose one. We deal combat damage with Obeka, we get 2 upkeeps, and then we get to choose the other 2 players. So now we get access to all of our opponents' libraries. That kind of seems funny to me. As Foretold is pretty solid here. It just sits on the battlefield and gets counters. Some of those courts, they're going to average from 4 to 5 mana. So the fact that we can just slam those on the battlefield for free after this hits 4 counters is just going to allow us to keep a lot of our mana up for counter magic or even furthering our board state farther. Let's move on to the next portion of this deck. I wanted to include some Suspend cards because yes, the Suspend counters come off at the beginning of our upkeep. So Jorah kind of seemed like a no-brainer. Now, notably, that thing is not once per turn. So we can basically turn all of our spells into 2 mana spells if Obeka has 4 power, right? Because all we do is we suspend our entire hand and then we deal combat damage with Obeka. As long as we get 4 upkeep triggers, all of those things are going to get cast for free. Rousing Refrain and Inspiring Refrain seem super solid as well. Now, if you don't know how these cards work, basically you just suspend them and they stay suspended. So we will get this every single turn as long as Obeka has 3 power. And the thing about Rousing Refrain is for some reason it says, hey, this mana is not going to empty as phases change. So we don't care if this goes off during combat because we don't lose the red mana. Profane Tutor seemed super solid. This does have Suspend too, so we can easily suspend this, deal combat damage with Obeka, and get that card the same turn we cast Profane Tutor. Inevitable Betrayal, taking our opponent's best thing out of their deck, seems pretty solid. Ancestral Visions for some card advantage, and Wheel of Fate again for some solid card advantage. Moving on to the core of the deck, we have Mirror Maid. This is going to just copy any of our broken enchantments on the battlefield. Copy enchantments. Again, we are going to try to copy those courts as much as possible. Mirage Mirror is super flexible. This can even copy our opponent's stuff, but 9 times out of 10, we're probably going to have something pretty juicy to copy on our side. Silent Arbiter and Virak Battle Horns are just going to make Obeka completely unblockable. We are completely fine without having to attack for the win, so having a Silent Arbiter on the battlefield ensuring that, hey, only one creature can attack is just going to help our game plan out a ton. Sword of Feast and Famine seemed solid here. We do have a lot of ways to draw a ton of cards during combat, so that's going to untap our lands and give us a pseudo extra turn and give us some mana to really utilize the cards that we drew. Menace Morgul, the Black Gate, Shizo's Death, Storehouse, these are all lands that can make our commander unblockable or extremely hard to block. These are just free. They're in the land slot, throw them in the deck, and they're just going to make our deck more consistent. Onaginata is going to turn our commander into a 5/5 with trample, and it's just very cost efficient, only 3 mana to play and equip. Nettlecyst, not as efficient, but we are running a ton of artifacts and enchantments, so the fact is this is going to just make our commander massive. Tenzagota's Maul, again, just very efficient, 4 mana to play and equip, gonna give our Obeka +3/+3, making it a 5/8 and trample at the same time. It's just going to make sure that she gets through, right? With that being said, that's going to bring us to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy these deck techs I do. I'll see you Friday on that Whatnot stream. Make sure to check the description to get your free $15. And with that being said, I would like to thank my patrons, Newsome, Excessum, Chicken Salad, and Preator. You guys are amazing. I appreciate all of you. I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.